Mike, welcome to Dad Edge, my friend. How are you?
Oh, I'm stoked to be here. Thank you for including me in your mission and your community. Stoked to be here.
Well, I would tell you what I think of you, but I don't think you're really worried about it.
This is true, but it is the subtitle of the book is Stop Worrying, but it's
Right.
not Stop Caring.
Right.
So it is important to care.
Right. Truth be told, I've been waiting all day to open up that line with you.
Dad jokes, you know what I
It
mean?
is.
Dad jokes, yeah, it's great.
It's dad jokes, man. Oh my gosh. So I got to tell you, man, I have been so excited to have this conversation with you because when your publicist, when your team reached out to us, and dude, I saw the name of this book. I was like, oh, yes, yes, yes. Let's absolutely do this. So before we
Cool.
get started here, man, let's just level set with what does Mike's family look like today?
Okay, so my immediate family is a wife. I've been married 20 some years, coming up on 30. And then I've got a 15-year-old son. And then we both have extended families that are um, complicated and wonderful.
Complicated and wonder. So what's complicated? What's wonderful?
It's just parents, and it's my parents and my that make it more complicated. And yeah, it's good. Like we've got a Italian family meets a Cuban family, and so we've got all the passion you would
Okay,
hope for.
got it. All right, all right. Now, did you grow up in a big family?
So I had a sister, a younger sister, and that was it. But my dad had like five or six brothers and sisters, so there was lots of people around.
Got it. Okay. And then your wife, did she come from a big family?
So on the Latin side, she has a younger sister. So we
Okay.
both have younger sisters. We're the older of the two,
Got it.
and that was it. And there was lots of cousins, and they had second cousins, and they had a bunch of folks around as well.
So what was childhood like for you? Just like with your own parents and experience and all that good stuff.
So my parents early, like right when I was born, they decided to drop out of the city, drop out of the normal type of life, and they moved to a farm in Virginia. And when I say farm, it was like more like a house kind of sitting by itself, dirt roads, no street lights, and it was in the backcountry. And so they just wanted to go be more connected to Mother Nature and have an organic way that they're going to raise their family. And then when I was in fourth grade, my parents decided to go back to the city life, and so we moved to California in the suburbs of San Francisco, and then down at the beaches in Los Angeles after that in high school. So I got some roots in nature early on, and then did a little suburb up in Seattle, in San Francisco, and then got back to the roots of Mother Nature growing up surfing in high school.
That is such a yin and yang. Like what an extreme experience growing up. So what were some of the things that you appreciate about the rural setting and some maybe things you didn't like, and then also about the city setting growing up?
When I was growing up in the rural setting, is what I loved is that Mother Nature ended up being one of my best teachers even today, because Mother Nature's has real consequences when you screw up. And so I distinctly remember my parents were laissez-faire in the way that they parented, which means hands off, attention off in some respects. Like you'll figure it out, and like they invested in a moral code, but not necessarily discipline code. And so I distinctly remember being really young and it getting dark out. We had like 20 acres in our backyard, and it was wild. And there was a creek that I was fascinated by, and I was probably like, I don't know, 9 years old or something. I remember it getting dark and figuring out like, oh, I got to get back. There's no lights. There's
Right.
kind of a flickering yellow light by the
Oh
house
man.
way over there. And so I remember making sure that I was paying attention to the lessons that Mother Nature was providing. And so that gave me a sense of independence, self-reliance, a scrappiness, and an attunement to Mother Nature. And so I definitely have a high regard and respect for the power of Mother Nature. And so that was that. And then I moved to the city, and I was like this fish out of water. And I came home the first day from, it was, I think it was fourth grade. And I came home the first day from fourth grade and I said, Mom, Dad, what does choose you out mean? I think it means they want to fight. Like, what does that mean? And they're like, yeah, it sounds like, how'd they say it? And I said, well, kid came up to me, and said, hey, new kid, choose you out. And I was like, okay. And then like I think I was supposed to show up in the back alley to fight after school. And so that night, my dad, my mom, and my grandmother at the time, they're like, okay, we're going to teach you how to fight. And
Wait,
so it was like this whole thing.
Did you say your grandmother was in on this?
Oh, she was in on it. Yeah. She's
no
like,
way.
Oh yeah. She goes, look,
okay.
She goes, you check for rings. This is after my dad's teaching me how to stand and what to do. And again, this is fourth grade. So I'm like, how old are you in fourth grade? Like 10, 11, 12, I don't know, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
And then she goes, okay, first thing, you make sure they don't have rings. If they have rings, before you get started, you tell them to take off the rings. I was like, okay, Grandma.
Okay.
And then
Thanks,
and she says, and if they start throwing knees, like you cover yourself downstairs. So 2 hands, make sure that you don't get those things hurt. I'm like, oh my God, okay. So I cover my jewels and make sure that their jewelry is off was one of the early lessons that my grandmother gave me in the city life.
That is hilarious.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Thanks, Grandma.
Exactly.
Yeah, my grandma taught me a thing or two, but fighting was definitely not one of them. That's quite an experience.
Scrappy Irish. So she's on the Irish side. My grandfather's on the Italian side. I identify more with my Italian roots, but she's you put the Italian and Irish together, and born for it in some respects.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to mess with that guy, to be honest. So
yeah, right, I know.
So now I'm curious, did the fight ever happen?
Oh yeah, it happened a bunch.
Oh, a bunch. Okay.
Yeah, a bunch. And so the new kid, I didn't fit, like I was like hillbilly meets like, I was just, and literally I say that endearing, like that's the environment I grew up in. And I was a fish out of water, and I was getting the wrong attention from the girls, meaning that it was girls that wanted to talk to me. Again, I'm like 12 years old, and the boys were like, yeah, we're not having it. Like you're going back to the farm, hillbilly. And so that was like my first understanding of inside group and outside group. And so I just knew that I wasn't going to turn my back on it. Like I had to stand up for myself. And so, yeah, it happened a bunch. And I am a pacifist by nature now. And I have a high regard for what the moment that another person, equally skilled, equally sized-ish, that moment where that they want to inflict harm, and you have to kind of square up with that. Like I have a lot of respect for what that teaches you. The consequences are too great, both of the actor of violence and the receiver of violence. It's too much. And I don't want my son to experience that. And I don't want anyone to experience it. But there is something incredibly rich that comes from those moments. And there's other ways you can find it. You can find it in Mother Nature at the precipice of danger and risk, that, if you figure out how to stay in it with all the skills that you have cultivated to manage that risk, there's usually beauty and insight and something very special on the other side of it. So, that's a extrapolation of a knucklehead experience as a kid.
It's really fascinating, man. I didn't know we were going to go down this route and hear these stories about living out Mother Nature to your fourth grade, which, by the way, I moved also as well when I was in fourth grade and switched schools, and nothing like the extreme you're even talking about. It was like literally, we lived over here and then we moved like 4 miles away and now we're in this school. But I remember like that's an age, that 10 years, 9, 10 years old, where you're very aware. The video camera's turned on, the memory's there and all that. And you sort of start to get your handle on social dynamics, and, it's awkward, it's weird, it's also fun and not so fun at times, but it's a real, crossroads, I think, of an age where a move like that is no matter if it's your extreme or just something smaller, it's something that you never really forget. I'm curious, as you got older and you had, this experience of living, pretty much, half your childhood in the environment that you did, and then going to the other extreme, which living in the city, how do you think that maybe prepared you a little bit better for just life in general as an adult?
There's probably the easy answer is transitions. Yeah. And there's a couple of little nuances that I think will help round this out is that uh, I, I don't think being a parent now, I'm not recommending my family or for my son that we move mid school years, but my parents
Yeah.
did that like from grade school to high school as well. So actually started, I went from a grade school area where all the kids were whatever. And then we moved a couple cities down to your point. This is once we're in the city to a new school, but it was for high school. So I started high school not knowing anyone. And then a couple months later, they decided to move down to California or to Southern California, to Los Angeles area. So I started high school freshman year, 2 months in, and that transition is really tough. And so what it ended up providing me is a sense of knowing how to do well in social settings. I had to figure out how to read a room, read an environment. I had to figure out the new cultural value set. I need to figure out the emotional intelligence to be able to navigate. And at the same time, how to figure out how to be me in it. And so transitions and the social aspect of it is the asset of moving a bunch, but it's really unsettling. And the thing that was underneath the surface is that my family's decisions and the way that they were designing the family life, meaning my parents' decisions, not the family, my parents' decisions and the way that they wanted their life was, in many respects, felt more important to, um, how am I saying this correctly? The way that they were making choices for them felt like those choices were better for them than it was for me. So underneath the surface is I wasn't quite sure how I mattered. And I didn't have an esteem problem. I didn't have a confidence problem, but there was this latent narrative about like, how do I really fit in?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's hard. It's hard to move. And listen, there's way harder things. There's no small violin here for me. There's extremely more challenging environments and conditions that some people, even in some of the greatest neighborhoods that they've endured, that I have not had to. And I'm talking about violence and abuse and. So I say all of that to say I'm grateful and I figured out transitions well. That was one of the upsides to it.
Yeah. I mean, talk about a training ground, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
just, being thrusted into change and having to adapt and all those things. With my childhood, just feedback I've gotten from the past is like, hey, you can talk to anybody and somehow make a conversation out of it. And I think a lot of that had to do with like my upbringing because it was constant change and it was constant, transitions and that's true. I think that also lays the groundwork exactly like you just laid out for a really great education as it relates to relating to people, social dynamics, transitions, the whole nine yards. It's a really fascinating story. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, it's cool. And dad was an alcoholic drug user, mom was codependent. So there was always a second narrative about having to figure out the social setting and figuring out like what's the temperature of the living room that I was walking into. So
Oh
that
my
was
gosh.
a pre-training ground to figure out the temperature of the classroom that I was walking into. And eventually trained me well to, be tuned to what's happening for other people. And so, to be good at anything takes time under tension. And that's one of the things that I was fortunate enough to figure out.
I 100% know exactly what you're talking about with
Yeah.
a parent who struggles with alcoholism and another one that struggles with codependency or both of them struggle with both. And wondering like what you're going to walk in on in a certain situation. I remember coming home from college, and sitting out in my driveway and, with my wife now, girlfriend at the time. And I remember just being like, what's it going to be tonight? Because it was always a roll of the dice, like, what personality I was going to walk in on, depending on how many drinks had flowed. Right. And for you, what was that environment was, I had a grandfather who drank a lot, but he was so loving and just it was kind of funny. The more he drank, the more he told you how much he loved you and just hug you, kiss you. And I don't ever have a bad memory of my grandfather being intoxicated. It was actually like when he drank, it was almost like he kind of didn't miss a beat.
Mm.
With my mom and men that she was married to or dated, it was always just extreme. Like, and it was a roll of the dice, one extreme or the other. For you growing up, was it the same for you, or was it more on the toxic end, or was it more on like, this just is the way my family
Oh yeah,
functions, or
it was a guessing game. It was
yeah.
trying to figure it out. It was a temperature taking, and that was when like sometimes my dad would come home and a bunch of guys were at the house and they'd be like, "Your dad's the greatest," and then sometimes they'd come home, they're like, "Oh shit, like damn," so they learned to be attuned as well. So there was the secondary glow. So it wasn't volatile. It was just inconsistent, and it was markedly different. So yeah. So there's just you pick up the skill of being able to tune and figure it out. That's
The
one of the skills.
question.
There's downsides. Don't get
Oh
me
yeah.
wrong. We could go play. There's a reason I went formally into training to become a psychologist. So there's plenty of downsides to it. I do not recommend for anyone listening to be an alcoholic or a codependent and think that that's going to serve your children well. That is not the answer.
Did you go in? I'm curious. Did you go into psychology because you more or less wanted to understand your own experiences and then be able to serve others that might have went through the same?
It was not about service. It was more selfish at the
Really? Okay.
beginning. It was sport brought me to psychology. And so I was really attracted to surfing and getting after it in consequential environments. And there's two types of surfing. There's core surfing and there's competitive surfing. And so the core surfing is you don't talk about what you've just done. You don't talk about how big it was, how heavy it was. You do it for the experience. And matter of fact, like no flash is better. And so there's an honesty in that environment. And so part of the majority of my upbringing in surfing was part of that core lifestyle. And then there were some of us that also liked the idea of competing. And it was really, the two worlds were a great divide. And there was a sellout. If you're part of the core group and you're going to compete, you're kind of selling out because you're doing it for judging and fans and observation, and like there's another component to it that is not valued in the core. So in the core stuff, I could do it. There's no one on the beach watching, judging, critiquing, and it was for me, and I could put myself in a heavy, critical situation and find that quiet calm. Now, on the days that it was a competition, and they were more rare, there's judges, people on the beach judging, critiquing, like I said, and I was 10% of myself. It felt like I didn't know how to surf. It felt like I couldn't connect at all to the waves, to my board. Like I was a disaster because I wasn't in my body. I was up in my head, and in my head, I was worrying about all the things that could go wrong. And I was in a man's heat. I was a 16-year-old surfing up in a man's heat, and he paddled by me one day. Perfect conditions, ideal, 6-foot glass, morning, light wind, just exactly what you would hope for a great session. Only 3 people in the water. Normally there's like 45. And he paddles by me and I'm competing against him, and he paddles by and he says, "Gervais, you gotta," he's like laughing, like, "I surf with you every day. You gotta stop worrying about all the things that could go wrong." And he just kind of laughed and paddled away. And I thought, how does he know? How does he know? Like, that's all I'm thinking about. I guess that doesn't work. But he didn't give me the answer. And so it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks that, wait, my physical skill didn't change. My technical skills didn't change from yesterday. Only the way I'm thinking changed. Okay. Don't think about all things that could go wrong. Well, let me think about the things that could go well. So that was me as a 16-year-old kid going, oh, there's this thing called the mind. There's like the way I use my mind matters. And it just set me down this path to be curious about the inner experience, not just the physical, technical skills, but what are these inner skills? And so undergrad in psychology, master's degree in sport and performance psychology, PhD in psychology with a specialization in sport and performance, licensed as a psychologist. And that was so that I could better understand what the psychology of excellence actually is. And as I started getting my arms around it a bit more, I was like, I need to share this with more people. This is amazing. This is how I want to spend my career. This is awesome. And I never thought about making money or business. Matter of fact, the whole industry at that time, it was so new. They're very clear. All of the folks that were 20, 40 years down the path before me were like, hey, listen, there's no money here. There's no jobs. If you want to stay in the industry, you need to become a professor so you can teach it to graduate students. But there's no real job here. I didn't hear any of that. I knew that this beautiful science of excellence mattered and made a material difference in me. And I felt more at home with myself. I could express myself more eloquently. And I knew there was more people out there like me. And I thought for sure that there was an industry just waiting you know, to build. And so that's kind of how the origins of the love for the industry was born out of like a pain of not being able to get free all the way to being able to share it with other people.
Man, that is so cool.
Yeah, it does. Even talking about it feels
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Well, it's unbelievably clear how you lay it out. It just it's dynamic, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also very simple the way you lay it out. There's one thing that comes to my mind as you shared this. I just had Gary John Bishop on the podcast as you and I were recording last week. It was later in 2023. But he said it's not necessarily the experience that we have; it's the meaning we give the experience that
1,000%.
we have.
That's
Yeah?
1,000%.
Can you give us your perspective of that statement? Because I think your experience of, like, your childhood with your dad and your mom, the experience that you shared about surfing, right? All the sports psychology education that you have, but what does that mean?
So the way that let's go brain and mind for a minute. Okay, so your brain is the 3.2 pounds of tissue that sits inside your skull, and it's the neural, electrical, and chemical exchange that's taking place. So that's the brain, and the brain's dictum is survival. It's to figure out how to keep you alive. And the mind is and that's a bit like the hardware. The mind is a bit like the software. And the software is, if you don't train your software or invest in your software, upgrade your software from what your parents gave you or your knucklehead friends, when you're younger, or what modern media gives you, if you don't intentionally upgrade your software, the brain's going to be more powerful. So you've got this junkyard patched together software that most people operate around or operate with, and this very powerful hardware. And the hardware's primary drive is survival. And so the way that it works is that your mind and the way that you think is a filter, and it's projecting and it's interpreting. So it's projecting and trying to make sense of what's happening around you. And again, if just left unchecked, it's only a reflection of the brain, which is figure out if this is safe or not, figure out if you're going to be okay or not, because that's what the brain is trying to do. So it overrides the software of trying to discern if something is better than just safety. So when you upgrade your mind, you upgrade your software, you interpret things that are more aligned with what you value as opposed to just safety. You interpret and project things that are more aligned with your purpose rather than just safety, with the short-term goals that you have, with the way that you want to be you rather than just reflexively react to stimulus. You get to impose yourself, meaning the expression of your craft, the expression of your values, and to do it in alignment with your purpose. It's the meaning that you give to any situation. The experience of it itself is less interesting than the way that you're interpreting or giving meaning to that experience. Experiences happen, and if you and I are going through the same situation, we're both in a car, we're both in the back seat, we're passengers, and we flip over end 5 times. One of us could walk out with PTSD, another of us maybe not. One of us could say, oh my God, like life, things happen for a reason. It's built on some belief system. One of us could have a very different experience. So the way that you use your thinking to make sense of the world around you is a rite of passage to be an adult. And if you want to be a high performing adult, you want to be a happy adult, you want to be a contributing member to the larger community, it is your responsibility to not just let the brain win, because the brain's just going to scan the world for survival and make sure you're okay. It's a very self-focused mechanism. And it's your rite of passage and your responsibility to invest in the software to to be able to eloquently make sense of the world around you, and to do it in a way that is not Pollyannish. It's not naive. So it's not positivity and optimism for the sake of that, but it's using your filter in a discerning way so that you can navigate the world that is aligned with your first principles, the virtues that your first principles rest on, and the purpose that you are claiming for your life efforts. And so if you think about that as a stack, virtues and the way that you express your virtues are your first principles. Your first principles are meant to be bellwethers on how to shape your thoughts, words, and actions. And if you do that all in alignment with a greater purpose, and you're doing it with other people, you kind of have what Harvard found after a 75-year study. I think it's now up to 80 years, an 80-year study of what the good life is. Two components that rise above all else is purpose and relationships. And so I'll add, your relationship with yourself is where it begins. Your relationship with experience is the extension of it. Your relationship with other people, your relationship with machines is going to be really important. And of course, your relationship with Mother Nature. So when you say it's a meaning, it's the meaning that we give it, I don't know a more simple way to say everything that I just said. And ultimately, true mastery is a love affair with the unfolding, unpredictable present moment. And if you can figure out how to have a love affair with the unfolding unknown, life is different, rather than feeling like you're resorting just back to the prime dictum of the brain, which is a self-focused, self-centered survival mechanism. Seeing all activities through that lens is a very powerful way to go through life, depressed, anxious, addicted, fill in the blanks of other maladies that many of us have. And I will not be as reductionist in any way to think that that's the only reason why anxiety, depression, addiction take place. It's much more complicated than that, but it's definitely a contributor if left unexamined.
Mike, I got to tell you, I've had some moments on this podcast, over 1,100 interviews now, where I've just sat here and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is like one of the best golden nuggets I've ever heard. You know, it's happened to, a few times. This is absolutely positively one of them. I mean, I've never even heard it said the way that you just said it. Even the simplicity of the brain is the hard drive and then your mind is the software, right? And we have to constantly upgrade the software. But that is so true. I know we're gonna get to your book here, but now that you've gone down this path, I do have one more question for you.
Thank you for the compliment, by the way. It's not lost on me.
Man.
It's like, it's heard and felt. So thank you.
Of course. I mean, like, this is, I wish I would have heard this like 15 years ago.
Me too.
Right?
Me too. 100%.
Oh my gosh.
And
for all you guys who are...
before you go to the next question, is like, this is where we can point to the psychology of excellence. The psychology of sport is what it's resting on, and say, well, what do the greats do? And I'm less interested in the ones that can just are clutch or something. I'm less interested in that. I'm more interested in how the greats organize their inner life and how they train their mind. Yeah. And if you're not training your mind and investing in upgrading it, the world's going to give you the ways that you should be thinking and organizing your thoughts. Confidence is a trainable skill. Being calm is a trainable skill. Deep focus is a trainable skill. Optimism is a trainable skill. And I haven't met a world's best that is not fundamentally optimistic, that doesn't know how to generate confidence, that doesn't have an ability to be calm in the noisiest, most intense environments. Those are trainable skills. They're not a rite of passage. You invest in them just like you would invest in any technical skill. Anything that you want to grow, you put it time under tension with them. And unfortunately, psychology has had this wonky narrative that it's for the weak, it's for the dysfunction, it's for the disordered, it's for the whatever. It's a disease-based model. And the strong ones right now are saying, no. You've got some of the best in the world that are saying, no, that's not how it works. Like, I train my mind every day, just like I train my physical and technical skills. Like, what do you mean you're not training your mind? And so there's a tide that's changing right now, and it's wonderful.
Wow. That is, I love the fact that optimism, confidence, all these things are trainable. It gives us hope because I love hearing from people who's just like, oh, I'm just not confident. I'm just not calm. I had one guy tell me that he had anger issues because his grandpa had anger issues. His dad had anger issues, so he is genetically predisposed to. He's just cursed with anger. But the question that I had for you was, so the brain is the hard drive, the mind is the software. We can constantly upgrade our software, and but the question, where does emotions play in all of this? So, like for instance, when happiness comes or when obstacles come and we are triggered, where do the emotions sort of fit into the hard drive and the software?
Okay, that's great. So we'll do emotions and feelings, and we'll just pull those two apart to answer your question. So emotions are physical. They are observable, meaning I can see your emotions. You can feel your emotions from a tactile perspective, meaning that if your heart rate goes up and at the same time your skin flushes and you start to sweat, that's an emotional response. And emotions, emotive, are designed, and we think at least the functionality of emotions is to get you moving, is to ready you to fight, flight, sometimes freeze. And that's what emotions are really designed for. So they are physiological, they are observable, they're public, and we can measure them. We can point to them and see them. They're tactile. Feelings, on the other hand, are subjective, they're private, and they require an interpretation or a labeling from the person that's experiencing them. So my heart rate comes up, I start to sweat a little bit, got a little activation in my arms, and my breathing rate is clicked up 20%. And the same exact physiological things have taken place for you. And we're both standing at the edge of a cliff. We both have a parachute in our hand. And you lean over and go, how you doing, Mike? And I say, I'm going to now tell you my feelings, right? Because you can see my eyes are dilated, I'm pounding in my chest. You can see. And I say to you, I'm freaked the fuck out. And I say, how are you doing? And you go, I'm alive. So we just talked about feelings. The way that you're interpreting those signals is the feeling. So feelings are subjective. Emotions are objective and observable. And so that's the difference between the two. So how do they work? Emotions can be triggered non-consciously by events in the environment. And when an event or a triggering activity takes place, like the smell of perfume, and that is the perfume of somebody that's broken your heart, you are supposed to have a response to that. And if you're still dealing with that heartbreak at some level, you'll smell that perfume and you might say, oh God, I don't know what it is. Maybe you're not even aware of the smell, but you say, you know what? Like, I'm just agitated right now because you lack awareness. Okay. So with greater awareness, you would go a step up and you'd say, man, I hate that smell. I'm so agitated right now. A step up from that is you would smell it and you go, oh, you know what? That reminds me of a heartbreak. Yeah. Kind of sad. Step up from that is you go, man, that reminds me of an ex relationship and it was really complicated. And, I think I've really learned a lot. And a step up from that is like you smell it and you're like, wow, I wonder how that ex is doing. And, because you have a sense that you're okay, right? And you're like, just a generative response. I wonder how that person's doing in my life or in their life. So there's like levels to it. And when you increase your awareness, and I'm going to play this back to your original question, when you increase your awareness of your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions, and the external world around you, the trigger of the internal experience, when you're more aware, you're able to adjust more eloquently. And so the way that emotions work, you can have a non-conscious response from an external stimulus. It could be, an edge of a cliff experience, or it could be a perfume, whatever. And then your thoughts also can influence your emotions. And so if you are unaware or unsophisticated or unexamined or unskilled at knowing how thought one and thought two and thought three work to create emotion A or emotion B, like life is really hard. It's a very difficult way to go through life because it feels like you're getting whipped around by the external world, when in fact, your thoughts play have a massive impact on your emotional experience. And so we call it trains of thought. And it's kind of like, you jump on a train of thought and there's a bunch of stops on that train. And if you get on the train of thought of irritation, and let's call that track I for irritation. You get on track I and you're like, man, I'm just so annoyed that such and such did that, or this didn't go my way. And then you start thinking about thoughts that support that type of irritated state. Well, you're going to get off on stop 32, right? And you're going to be in a highly irritated, agitated state. So thoughts impact emotions is a way to think about this. Emotions can impact thoughts, but let's save that for, the graduate level class. So your job is to increase your awareness of how your thoughts impact your emotions. If you want to live a happy, a grateful, a productive, a zest for life kind of way, then the responsibility is have those thoughts that create those experiences, those emotional experiences. And it doesn't mean that you don't want to be sad. It doesn't mean you don't want to be irritated or angry. It just means that you know what levers to pull and that you're actually in control of it for the most part. No, I don't know anyone that has this fully mastered. No, maybe the Dalai Lama. Jesus probably did a pretty good job at it. Confucius seemed to nail it. There's plenty of historical greats, But so you're just spending time to become more aware of your inner life so that you're not whipped around by the external world. That is the game of mastery of self. And the most powerful people on the planet are those that work from the inside out, and they're not whipped around by the external world around them. They know how they work and how they can cultivate the internal experience to be able to fill in the blanks, do whatever it is that they want to do in the upcoming moment, upcoming years. That's what mastery of self is really about.
Is my head like exploding? Because I feel like it's doing this. Like,
that's very kind.
It's just,
yeah.
I love learning stuff like this. I
That's good,
really,
isn't
really
it?
do.
Yeah.
And the way you lay it out, Mike, is just, it's so, I know it's complex, but the way you're communicating it is very simple to us, which I
Thank you.
really, really appreciate. I want to dive into your book, and I want to also piggyback on some of these concepts that you're already talking about. These thoughts, and like you gave the example of like, hey man, how you doing? You're like, I'm about ready to freak the hell out right now. And how are you doing? I'm like, oh, I feel alive, right?
Yeah,
But
right.
in your book, you talk about the real consequences of stress and anxiety, which I think right now in particular, my wife and I were having this discussion, kind of a side note to digress, which is there's a lot of chaos going on in the world right now, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of economic things going on. And my wife, my grandfather was like one of the coolest dudes on the planet. And when he retired, he started listening to like a lot of AM, talk news. And you go over to his house, be like, hey, grandpa, what are you doing? And normally he'd be like, hey, what's going on? And then in his retired years, he was like, country's going to hell. The whole world, everything's going to hell. Like, it was just, we kind of like laugh about it. And my wife was like, do you think like your grandpa was right? Or do you think that the world's always been like this and we're just now more aware of it? And I was like, man, that is such a good question. But the overall, like, if you really kind of like check the gauge on people and how they're doing and what's going on in their mentality, there is a lot of uncertainty out there. There's a lot of stress out there. There's a lot of anxiety out there. And, I know in your book, you talk about the real consequences of that. And what are those consequences?
Yeah, cool framing. I'll add one layer to it, which is anxiety is internal and stress is internal. And there's types of stress that you want to get good at. There's acute stress, moderate stress, and chronic stress. And when most people talk about stress, they're pointing to chronic stress, which is like the accumulation of acute stressors that you couldn't figure out how to shed. So if you can get good at high alarm bells, high stress environments, and the reason you want to get good at it, because that's where unlocking takes place. That's where insight happens. It's where you get better at anything that you care about. So acute stress is required. And that means just getting to the messy edge of something to get to have those unlocks. And I'll explain that for the contrarians in another way in just a moment. But getting good at understanding how to work with acute stress allows you to avoid or staff off chronic stress. Chronic stress is the internal experience where you feel overwhelmed by the external activities of life. You have not taken responsibility for how you work with your own thoughts and feelings and emotions. And the external world is so noisy, so powerful that it's overrun your ability to manage the noise of the external world. And so the internal world is now noisy. So again, the most powerful people are working from the inside out. The external world has always been radical and fast paced, and it's not. The dark ages were hard. I don't want to live in the dark ages. Like, think about the brutality of the dark ages. Think about go back to what am I thinking of right now? Who's the number one? Hold on, it'll come to me. The Hun family.
Like Attila the Hun?
Yeah, right. So the Hun family and Genghis Khan, and like I'm picking up, the Romans were pretty brutal. Like, there was some really brutal times in our life, or in the history of humanity. There are some pockets in the world right now that are experiencing that type of brutality. There's 300 million people in India that don't have running gas and electricity. Like, so I don't say anything I'm saying naively or in an ivory tower, but the world is fast paced. Check. How skilled are you to navigate that internal, the internal life based on the external speed? I think that we can do far better. And where do we learn these skills of self-talk and breathing and framing situations and reframing them, and the development, cultivation of virtues and how to express them and use them as bellwethers and filters? There is a sophisticated software to invest in, and I didn't get it in grade school. I didn't get it in high school. I didn't get it in college. So there's people like yourself that are pointing to these best practices like breathing and self-talk and mental imagery. And this is what athletes do, right? That's how they train their mind. So I don't think the world is better or worse. I think that that's an irrelevant positioning. I think it's understanding how to deal well with stress. Stress has always been part of the narrative. How do we deal with acute stress well? So we staff off chronic stress. How do we invest in recovery practices? And how do we build the capacity to handle more stress? That's the unlock from athletes. So if we look at the athletic world, and it's easy to look at how beautiful it is for them to do the extraordinary and how graceful and how clutch and how amazing. And that's all noise. It's fun to look at and it's an escape. But if you go right underneath the surface, the way that they've organized their life is every day amongst their peers, who happen to also be great, amongst adult coaches who are very knowledgeable and hold the power of the bench or playtime and contract negotiation. And in the NFL is there for 9 seasons, stands for not for long. The average tenure is 2.6 years. So coaches determine whether you're going to last longer than, 1 season. And every day in practice, you have to get to the emotional messy edge where you're not all buttoned up. It doesn't look pretty. You don't look skilled. And you get to that thing to figure out what's breaking down, what you're doing well, so that you can do the same tomorrow to try to figure it out. And so that's called building capacity. That's a model to fundamentally approach what you're capable of, as opposed to a model for relief. And I just need more massage, and I need more this, and I need the world to calm down a little bit. And, why do people always do this? And damn it, somebody parked in my spot again. And can you believe this happened? And that's all the external world, as opposed to making some fundamental decisions that you're going to go after your capabilities, what you're capable of. And if you line that up with purpose, you got something pretty special. And if you back it by training your mind every day, training your mind to be calm, to be confident, to be optimistic, to focus deeply, and to learn how to eventually trust yourself. Those are kind of the big rocks. Of course, mental imagery, as I talked about as well.
You said something in there, especially when it comes to professional athletes, about it was understanding what they were doing well in like this particular practice, so they could then replicate what they were doing well. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what happens at the messy edge is like that's where you really
Yeah.
meet yourself. You know, and
And
if
is
you've got some astute observers, they're watching. Like that's where you meet yourself, your physical, technical, and mental skills.
Do you have a, and by the way, we can obviously leave names out of this because I know you've worked with professional athletes, but do you have a story that really emulates like the messy edge and what you're talking about?
Yeah, yes, and I mean it's every day. It's almost like
Yeah.
it's the water that we breathe. It's the water that we swim in. Sorry. And so let me think of a story that illustrates. I mean, I just want to say it's every day for the athletes that are committed. And
Right.
at the elite level, most are committed. There's knuckleheads. There's people that are just thankful that they got there and they don't really know what to do with the fame and the money and, and they're undisciplined. They just wanted to get there. And that's the minority, So um, that's why if you get a chance to go to practice and you get to know some folks that are fundamentally committed to being their very best, uh, they are pushing to get to the edges in the weight room, in the film room, in the meditation room. They are fundamentally committed to understand how to be more present. And I'll just kind of bring us home with that idea is that being present is where everything amazing happens. It's where high performance is expressed. It's where wisdom is revealed. It's where everything true, beautiful, and amazing is experienced. So the great unlock is to know how to be in the present moment more often and how to use and navigate your psychological skills to stay in it. Even when it's hard and ugly and messy, just to stay in it just a few extra beats, to trust just a little bit more that you're going to be okay. Even if it feels like you're going to fall into 1,000 pieces, you're going to figure it out. And that's where the adaptations take place.
I find that it's one of the hardest things for basically human beings is to be in that present moment. We're either thinking about the past or we're worrying about the future but being like right here in my shoes and in this seat and all those things. I even think about this from a dad perspective. So this is a dad show, right? Being fully present, like with our kids or our spouses or whatever. What's the thing that you have found is, one or two things that are the missing ingredient that pull people out of the present that's right there in front of them that they could grasp, but we're just not trained to do so.
Oh, so let's flip it. And what are the things that people do to be more present as
Yeah.
opposed to, right? So if
Yeah.
you're scrolling on social media, there's a present, your mind is present and focused there. Unfortunately, it's for the most part kind of numbing or relief or just kind of escapism in some respect. And I know what that feels like as well. But what's happening is um, there's a novelty that's about to unlock the next time you go to the next picture. So there's a novelty and that is incredibly stimulating. Our brain loves something new. And so if you think about taking just that simple insight that most of us can relate to, and you bring it into being a parent or playing the guitar or writing emails, whatever it might be for you, and you can orientate yourself to find something new, to be in awe
Something
of what's
new.
about to happen, and like be curious about the experience itself, which takes a bit of discipline to do, where you don't have to have any discipline on social media. It's just naturally happening. But if you take that crosswalk into the activities that matter to you, so one of the ways that people do that, kind of hijack that interest, is by procrastinating. So now I got to get it done now. I got to get this done. So there's a stimulation in urgency, which makes it's a forcing function to be in. And so you can do that by extreme sports or consequential environments or manufacturing being late so that there's a stimulus there. So all the concepts I just talked about hang together. And, and so that's one. The second is that you sit in boring environments and you work with the content and the quality of your mind in those boring environments. This is where meditation pays dividends. So I'm doing two extremes. One is the environment of thrill and consequence, and then the environment of mundane. And in the mundane, and this practice has been around 2,600 years to our best understanding, meditation practices, is that you're sitting to work with increasing the awareness of when your mind wanders to something more stimulating than the boringness of an inhale and the boringness of an exhale. And when your mind wanders to the stimulating thing, you come back to the one thing. So either way, you're learning how to stay in the present moment more often. So those are two kind of basic camps to think about. And that's why coaches and athletes love a stimulating training environment. Upbeat, fast, tempo, let's make it as lifelike and real-like to the actual scenario as you can, because it forces the mind to be fully engaged. And then the counter rotation to that is mindfulness meditation. And you could say conversations with people of wisdom, and you could say journaling would be those three practices, contemplative practices, if you will.
Wow. My mind is just circling. Like I literally had like this list of topics that I want to talk to you about with your book, but going in this
All of this is
direction.
in some respect, all of this is in the book,
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I think what we did at the book is just pointed to one of the great constrictors of you being your very best, which is this external worry. Am I okay in the eyes of others? Because remember, safety is belonging. And this is the center of the book, is like safety is belonging. And if you don't investigate how your brain is working and how your mind is impacted by your brain, you're going to make choices in your life to fit in, to not be rejected, because the brain's dictum is to fit in. That is a survival mechanism. Because if you and I were 200,000 years ago in the tribe, and like the elders say to us, like, you two have kind of blown it now. Like, you keep coming up short. I don't know what you're doing, Larry and Mike. Like, you guys just listen, I'm putting you on warning. And we're like, okay. And then we cause another distraction. We're noisy in some other part where, we accidentally burn down a teepee, and then we go hunting and we come back with nothing. At some point, we are more of a distraction and noise and a danger and a detriment to the tribe. So the elders say, hey, you two got to go. That's a near death sentence. Because you and I, and maybe a couple of our inner tribe that, maybe we've got some family members or some kids or whatever. And like, now we've got to go fend, forage, fight, hunt, gather, defend. We've got to do all of that. And it's just too much. We lose the power of the tribe if we're trying to do it on our own. So fitting in is safety, and fitting in modern times is acceptance. That's why we're so good at picking up just the slightest of rejection. And we had fun. We named it FOPO, the great fear of other people's opinions, So we had fun with it, and we talk about how to examine it and how to get free from it.
I was at a Tony Robbins event 9 years ago. Actually, it'll be 10 years in 2024. And he said something that got everybody's attention there. He's like, hey, do you want to know the number one human fear? And everyone was like, yeah. And of course, you think about like, it's burning to death, drowning, or like starving to death or whatever. He said, it's the fear of not being enough. You won't be loved, and you will be left alone and cast aside. And when he said that, I was like, and it's right in line with what you're talking about. It's like this being cast into isolation where you're no longer in the safety of the community or the tribe or whatever. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is so true. And then he gave the example of Shawshank Redemption, where the guys got sent to the hole, for isolation, where all they had was their thoughts. And, they were away from, everybody, which if we have a minute, I would love to just ask that question, because I know this is part of the book, which is why we have this aversion to being alone with our thoughts. And I mean, you look around and everyone's on their phone. It's almost like no one can actually just sit and be ever. And, kids and adults and everybody, it's almost like, oh my gosh, like if it's just me and my thoughts, it's kind of a scary place. Why is that?
Well, we highlighted an experiment that was done about people that actually were given the opportunity to be by themselves and to be with their own thoughts. Because there's this fantasy, like if I just had more time and I could just kind of get with myself. So they ran an experiment and gave people time with themselves. And in the environment, there was no stimulus other than a shock collar. And come to find out, people would rather shock themselves than to be with their own thoughts. and men had a
No way.
outpaced need to shock themselves than women. Go figure. And so that's a wild finding, is that people would rather
Jeez.
shock themselves than be alone with their own thought. And that's because, one, it's boring to be with your own thoughts. Two, when you start to examine the way that you think about yourself, it's there's some dark recesses, and it's hard. And so so the stimulus is a relief to the honesty and the exploration. Like, we say we want to be great, but we don't really want to know ourselves. We say we want to be great, but we don't really invest in building capacity. We're looking for relief rather of the anxiety. And that anxiety is born predominantly in the way that you understand how you fit, how to use your own internal resources mapped up against the external demands of the environment.
How many? So this was a study that was done that
Yeah.
people would rather be shocked than be alone with their thoughts.
Isn't that wild?
That's freaky.
Yeah.
Like that I've never, I mean, I guess to some degree I understand it, but at the same token, I mean, that's a really fascinating experiment on humanity.
It
Right?
is. I know. It's
So
really, yeah.
I guess, the last question I have for you when it comes to, let's wrap this up in a bow for men, husbands, fathers, right? As it relates to what you've put in this book, which by the way is brilliant,
Thank
and
you.
all the work that you're doing, which by the way is brilliant. Like, I'm sitting here thinking like, oh my gosh, like I cannot wait. My 17 and 15-year-olds favorite words to me at night is let's talk. They always like to talk before they go to bed, which I love. Like, sometimes I'm scratching my head. I'm like, I can't believe these teenagers like still want to talk to dad like about their day and all this, but I can't wait to share with them tonight about like, hey, your brain is the hard drive and your mind is the software, and we need to constantly upgrade our software. Like, I can't wait to see that reaction on their face. But if we were to just encapsulate this for a man, a husband, a father, how do we go about pursuing this life with this type of mentality?
Oh, that's a cool question. I think that it has to matter. There's some fundamental decisions that we need to make. And if you want to be your very best, it does require an investment in your inner life. And that takes time. And it's actually, the work is not complicated. Psychology is complex, but the work is not complicated. It's understanding how you work from the inside out. Invest in meditation, mindfulness, invest in some sort of writing, invest in some habits that support you to be more aware and more discerning with how you use your thoughts. So it starts with a fundamental commitment and a decision to work from the inside out. And we're only talking like 10, 15 minutes a day. Like, start there. And then from there, if you are in a position that you've got some time under tension, meaning you're working on increasing your awareness, you're working on increasing confidence and being calm and working on being better with your thoughts, is that you'll end up trusting yourself more. And when you do that, you can settle into the present moment more often. And when you settle into the present moment more often, because you're not overwhelmed by how it's going to go based on what my son or spouse might say or coworker, and I'm just with it, less judgmental, less reactive, more aware, more responsive, then you end up being in the present moment more often. What ends up happening is your partners in life, they end up feeling seen and heard and valued more often. And so now you've invested in not only the quality of your life, but the quality in others. And if you want to live the extraordinary life, nobody does it alone. It's too complicated. It's too big. And so we need each other. And we're built more like a coral reef than a nail banged into a board by itself. And so to be part of the fabric of the coral reef, like, you do need to be able to take care of yourself and to do it well. So that's the internal investment. And then on the other side of it is, like, if you're in a position of leadership, know that your people, there's a human energy crisis. Know your people are tired. Know your people are frustrated and overwhelmed, and the 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., shift is just too much. And if we don't modern leadership is figuring out right now, and this is what we're doing with companies like Microsoft, and I can go down the list, but helping them put these practices inside the rhythm of their business. So big sport is about 10 to 15 years ahead of big business. And 15 years ago, we had psychologists coming in the building, sports psychs coming in the building of sport. And that's good. It's a good start. Now they are sitting at the coach's table. They're walking in the hallways. So psychology is happening in the rhythm of the business. It's not helping an athlete know how to do imagery later, or self-talk later, or breathing training later. It's in the rhythm of business. And that's where business is heading. So for folks that are in position of influence in their companies, first, do the internal work so that you can be about it. And then secondly, start investing in ways to put it in the rhythm of your business. And that is a game changer because nobody has extra time. So using the power of the agenda to fold it in is a significant investment to make in your people.
Wow. Dude, this was Mike, this was awesome.
Thank you. Yeah.
Like man, this was, I want to bottle it up and replay this myself. I'm not one of those people that goes back and listens to my own show. This one, yeah, I'm going to listen to it.
Very
probably
cool.
2, 3, 4 times along with your book.
Thank you.
Oh man, this was so good. I want to obviously point the men in the direction to find you, your book, resources, whatever you want to lead these men to. I would love for you to share.
Yeah, the fun place is the Finding Mastery podcast. If when they're in rotation, to punch over there and check out what we're doing. And then the website has lots of resources, and you can learn more about what we're doing to help companies do what I just talked about in individuals. And that's findingmastery.com. And then the book, you can get the book anywhere. It's great if you support your local businesses, local bookshops, but Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, all those places have it. And it's called The First Rule of Mastery. Stop worrying about what people think of you.
That is an incredible title. Was that you that came up with the title?
Nobody does it alone. This was actually like we were workshopping this. The narrative underneath of it is that I wrote an article for HBR and it was titled "Stop Worrying About What People Think of You," and it was a #1 downloaded article for 12 months in a row. So the HBR is the publisher of the book. They said we've got to keep it in there. Like it's too important. You hit a nerve.
100%.
And so I didn't want that to be the title of the book, so we just banged it around a bunch. And maybe it was going to be called Finding Mastery. No, that wasn't quite it because it's the business. We didn't want to get complicated. So the first rule, is where it came from.
Oh, you got it. Well, you nailed it.
Oh, thank you.
When I saw the email come through from your team on the title of the book alone, I was like, this is an absolute hell yes. We need to have him on the show.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's just such a good message for us. And obviously, and that's just the surface. It's all these gems that you gave us. And I took an entire page of notes, typed out an entire page of notes as you were going through this. So this was awesome, man.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much, Larry, for the kindness and extending your time to be able to share the things I love sharing. So thank you very much.
Oh, you bet. My pleasure. Gentlemen, you won't have to look far for Mike's book. Head on over to thedadedge.com/Friday 139 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday 139 for this show. We'll have Mike's podcast in there, findingmastery.com, as well as a couple links to grab his book. Obviously, if you guys like what you heard today, we've only scratched the surface. Go out and really explore what Mike's putting out in the world. It is obviously great stuff. And Mike, from my heart to yours, thank you so much for coming on. You gave us a huge blessing today. And I feel like I could Joe Rogan you a little bit. We could talk for 3 hours, but I know we don't have the time for that. But this was awesome. I really enjoyed it.
I really appreciate you, Larry. Thank you so much.
You bet, brother.